The Ukrainian foreign minister has strongly criticized Russian airstrikes on the country overnight, which killed at least one person and injured 15 others. Officials said the country was under air raid alert and warned of drones and ballistic missiles. In the capital, Kyiv, the city's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, said that nearly 6,000 buildings were left without heating. Military bases were also struck.
U.S. Marshals are preparing enforcement mechanisms against Donald Trump, and sources suggest this represents his worst nightmare becoming reality. We're not talking about theoretical discussions or abstract legal debates. We're talking about reports that legal experts and judges are actively discussing what happens when marshals need to physically enforce court orders against sitting president. That Trump faces $454 million fraud judgment in New York that keeps accumulating interest daily. That he's receiving contempt warnings for defying immigration court orders. That federal law under Title 28 United States Code Section 566 requires marshals to execute all lawful writs and orders from U.S. courts without exception. And what might make this moment so significant is the enforcement framework being established. When judges are publicly warning about contempt consequences, when sheriffs in New York have authority to levy or sell Trump's assets if he fails to pay, when marshals confirm they would remove president from courtroom if judge ordered it, that's not just talk. That could be systematic preparation for enforcement that Trump can't intimidate, can't buy off, and can't twist in his favor like he's done throughout entire career. But before we break down how enforcement actually works and why Trump's properties could be seized if he continues defying courts, real quick. You cannot trust mainstream media to explain that this isn't hypothetical anymore, but rather concrete legal mechanisms being put in place. That's why we built Patrick Smith's show to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want analysis that actually connects Trump's fraud judgment to Marshal Enforcement Authority and what happens when someone who thinks they're above law discovers they're not, hit that subscribe button right now. All right, let's get into what Marshal Enforcement means and why sources suggest Trump is running out of options. Because here's what people don't understand. Court orders aren't suggestions. You can't just ignore ruling or think you can delay it indefinitely with appeals. When court hands down judgment, especially final one or temporary restraining order, there's no wiggle room. You have to follow it. And if you don't, courts have specific mechanisms to make you comply. That's where U.S. Marshals come in. Federal law is straightforward. Marshals must carry out all lawful writs and orders issued in name of United States. If federal judge says someone needs to be arrested, marshals execute that. If judge says property must be seized, marshals handle it. If someone is held in contempt and ordered into custody, marshals enforce it. Their job is clear. They work directly for courts ensuring judicial orders are executed. And sources suggest Trump is facing multiple situations where federal courts might need to enforce orders against him or his administration. When you've spent career believing rules don't apply to you, when you've always been able to delay and dodge accountability, discovering that enforcement system exists that won't back down might be devastating realization. Let's start with immediate situation because sources suggest New York fraud case represents most concrete enforcement threat Trump faces. This isn't theoretical. This is final judgment of $454 million that's already enforceable right now. Judge Arthur Engoron made his decision, and while Trump has appealed, that judgment still stands. New York law allows state to begin enforcement actions while judgment is active. Reports indicate Trump posted bond to hold off enforcement during appeal, but here's catch. If he loses appeal and judgment gets confirmed, that bond money goes to New York and he still owes the rest. Think about what happens if he can't or won't pay. New York has power to start seizing his assets. Sources suggest Attorney General's office could secure what's called writ of execution, which is court order telling law enforcement to seize property to fulfill judgment. In this case, local sheriffs or appointed receivers, not U.S. Marshals since it's state matter, would handle enforcement. The process is straightforward. Courts issue orders, law enforcement carries them out, property gets taken, assets are sold, and money goes towards settling judgment. Reports indicate legal experts have spelled out what this could mean for Trump's properties. And there's specific buildings at risk. 40 Wall Street, commercial building in Manhattan that Trump owns through various entities could be targeted. Sources suggest if New York issued writ of execution, They could put lien on property and even force sale. Sheriff or court-appointed official could take charge of building and auction it off. Same goes for other Trump properties like Trump Tower, his golf courses, various real estate investments. All of it could potentially be seized to satisfy judgment. Reports indicate while Trump's lawyers would contest every detail, debating which assets truly belong to him versus what's held in trusts or corporate structures, ultimately, if judgment remains intact and Trump doesn't pay, enforcement is fully authorized. Think about interest accumulation. Judge Engoron's decision adds interest on fraud amount, and it accumulates daily. Sources suggest every day Trump avoids payment. Total keeps ballooning. Some estimates place total at over $500 million right now, and it continues rising. Reports indicate Trump finds himself in tight spot. He's appealing, hoping for overturn, but as that drags on, his debts mount higher. If he loses appeal, he'll be on hook for even more than original ruling. At some point, if he can't pay, New York will step in to enforce. We're talking about sheriffs executing seizures, asset sales. Sources suggest there's very real chance Trump's properties could get taken and sold off to cover debt he refuses to acknowledge. But let's talk about criminal contempt dimension, because sources suggest that's another enforcement hammer about to fall. There's already been discussion about judges finding probable cause that Trump's administration didn't follow court orders related to Venezuelan deportations. Criminal contempt is serious. Reports indicate it can lead to fines and up to 6 months jail time for each charge. And guess who carries out those contempt orders? U.S. Marshals. If judge decides to issue bench warrant for someone's arrest over contempt, marshals are ones who will take that person into custody and bring them back to court. Think about constitutional question. Would judge actually issue warrant for Trump while he's still president? Sources suggest that's hefty constitutional debate. But what's not in question is they could issue warrants for other officials in his administration who are ignoring court orders. And that's already being discussed. Reports indicate judges are pinpointing which officials are responsible for non-compliance and threatening personal contempt charges. If they follow through, marshals will be making those arrests. This is based on settled law going back centuries. U.S. Marshals Service has been executing court orders since 1789. And there's what marshals themselves have said. Sources suggest Los Angeles Times piece on consequences of Trump disobeying court orders cited U.S. Marshal spokesperson confirming that if judge ordered them to remove Trump from courtroom for being disruptive or contemptuous, they would carry out that order. Marshals are candid about it. If judge says remove president, they'll do just that. It's their job. Reports indicate what we're seeing is legal system from judges to enforcement agencies quietly preparing for possibility they might have to physically enforce orders against Trump. And this is where it gets tricky for him because he's been used to simply brushing off court orders, delaying cases, using lawyers to dodge accountability. But this time courts are serious and ready to act. Share this video with everyone you know because there's enforcement memo significance. Congressional Research Service dated 2025 laid out what happens when government officials don't stick to court orders. Sources suggest courts can use civil contempt, criminal contempt, and even instruct U.S. Marshals to carry out arrests or seize property to ensure orders are followed. It's guideline for how courts enforce rulings when faced with defiance from executive branch. Reports indicate urgency for this memo comes from legal experts noticing Trump often ignores court orders and they're gearing up for what might happen next. When system is preparing enforcement protocols specifically anticipating your defiance, that suggests they're not going to back down like you expect them to. But step back and consider what actual enforcement might look like because sources suggest there are basically 3 possible scenarios. First scenario is Trump could comply with court orders. He'd pay New York fraud judgment, follow immigration court decisions, respect judicial orders related to war powers. If he did all that, enforcement wouldn't need to kick in. Courts would be satisfied and everything would quietly move along. But sources suggest, given Trump's track record, that doesn't seem likely outcome. He tends to fight back, delay, and defy orders he doesn't agree with. Think about second scenario. Trump continues to disregard courts, but there are no consequences. Judges issue orders, Trump ignores them, nothing changes. Courts back down and enforcement doesn't happen. Reports indicate Trump might be counting on idea that courts won't dare enforce orders against sitting president because they fear political fallout. Maybe there's some truth to that, and perhaps some judges will hesitate. But warnings about contempt and enforcement memos show judges are indicating they're ready to take action if needed. Sources suggest they're not backing down and are preparing for enforcement. And there's most likely third scenario. Trump continues defying courts and slowly enforcement starts rolling out. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but gradually. For instance, New York might begin with small-scale enforcement actions. Sources suggest they could lien property or garnish his income, taking initial steps towards seizing assets. Trump would fight these moves one by one, yet enforcement would continue unfolding. Reports indicate picture federal judge holding official from his administration in contempt for ignoring immigration order. That official gets arrested, not Trump himself, but someone close within his team, and suddenly that's message being sent. Think about how gradual approach works. Each enforcement action, no matter how minor, starts chipping away at Trump's authority. Sources suggest if New York successfully liens Trump Tower, even if it doesn't sell right away, it would be humiliating for him. It would show courts have power to touch his properties, proving he's not above law. If marshals arrest just one official for contempt, it sends clear message to everyone else in administration. Reports indicate if you defy court orders, you might be next. As these enforcement actions build up and courts show they mean business, Trump's choices dwindle. He could keep fighting, but that comes with costs including legal fees, increased exposure, further risks of contempt. Or he could comply, which would mean admitting defeat and acknowledging courts hold power over him. Sources suggest Trump despises idea of admitting defeat more than almost anything. But let's examine political dimension because sources suggest enforcement against Trump could fundamentally alter his image and power. Trump's entire brand is built around being untouchable, operating above fray. If marshals or sheriffs start enforcing court orders against Trump, if his properties get taken or his officials face arrests, that would shake up his brand. Reports indicate it's not about him being special anymore. It shows he's just like anyone else, bound by law. Think about how supporters might react. Some might get even more fired up seeing it as proof system is against him. Sources suggest they could get angry and protest, but others might start questioning things. Maybe they think Trump really did mess up. Perhaps courts are right. Maybe he isn't strong leader we thought he was. Reports indicate both reactions are possible, but Trump probably fears that second one more. If even few supporters begin thinking he should follow law, that could chip away at his political power. And there's Republican calculation. Right now, Trump thrives on rallying voters and ensuring Republican Party fears pushing back against him. Sources suggest, but if that power starts fading, Republicans might begin reasoning they don't have to back him anymore, that he's becoming liability. When that mentality changes, everything could flip. Reports indicate impeachment could start looking more feasible, and Senate conviction might come into play. It would make enforcement a lot simpler too, since judges wouldn't worry as much about political fallout. Share this with everyone because there's legacy dimension. Sources suggest, imagine if Trump's presidency wraps up with sheriffs selling off his properties because of court judgments or marshals arresting his team for contempt. That's not ending. That paints him as strong leader. Reports indicate rather it shows someone who tried to take on law and lost, who believed he was untouchable until reality hit him hard. That becomes how history remembers him, not as tough negotiator or successful businessman, but as person who thought he was above law and discovered he wasn't, when courts finally enforced their authority. But let's talk about specific tools courts have at disposal because sources suggest options are extensive and powerful. Courts can bring in receivers to manage Trump's properties while things are sorted out. They can freeze bank accounts. They can take slice of revenue from his businesses. Reports indicate they can hold hearings where Trump has to prove he has enough assets to cover judgments, ask him questions under oath about finances, demand documents. This power is all part of how courts enforce judgments. Think about what happens if Trump ignores any of that. Sources suggest he just digs himself deeper with more contempt charges, sanctions, enforcement actions. Whole system is designed to push back against anyone who doesn't comply, making consequences so tough that eventually going along seems like only choice. Reports indicate every time he's found in contempt, every court action, it all contributes to narrative. It paints a picture of someone who disregards law, thinks he's above it all. And that could have serious implications, whether he's trying to secure legacy or facing criminal investigations after time in office. Make sure you're subscribed to Patrick Smith Show because there's documentation being created. Sources suggest with all this enforcement going on, there's a lot of record building. Every contempt finding, every court action creates paper trail showing pattern of defiance. Reports indicate that becomes evidence. Evidence for impeachment proceedings, evidence for future prosecutions, evidence historians will use to judge his presidency. When legal system documents systematic refusal to comply with court orders, that's not something you can spin away or deny later. It's permanent record of someone who believed rules didn't apply to them until courts proved otherwise through actual enforcement. So here's what martial enforcement preparations reveal. Trump faces $454 million fraud judgment that keeps growing with daily interest accumulation. New York has authority to seize his properties if he doesn't pay, including Trump Tower and commercial buildings. U.S. Marshals confirm they would execute contempt orders, including potentially arresting officials who defy judges. Federal law requires marshals carry out all lawful court orders without exception for powerful people. Judges are publicly warning about contempt consequences and building enforcement framework. Sources suggest this represents systematic preparation for enforcement Trump can't intimidate or dodge. When you've spent career believing you're above law, discovering courts have actual power to seize properties and arrest officials might be devastating realization. Question is whether Trump complies to avoid escalating consequences or keeps resisting until enforcement becomes so aggressive he has no choice but to acknowledge courts hold authority over him, regardless of how special he thinks he is. Stay tuned.